The envelope had the council's logo in the corner. Inside was a letter from the planning enforcement team informing me that development had been carried out at my property without planning permission, that they were considering whether enforcement action was appropriate, and that I had the right to submit a retrospective planning application within a specified period. I sat with it for a while. Then I read it again, more carefully, and found the sentence that mattered. I had the right to submit a retrospective planning application. I want to be honest up front. The error was mine. I had assumed, based on something I'd half read online, that my rear extension fell within permitted development rights and didn't require an application. I had not checked carefully enough. I had proceeded without checking. The extension had been complete for 8 months. What I hadn't understood was that I had exceeded the depth limit for permitted development on a semi-detached property by 40 centimetres. 40 centimetres over a measurement I hadn't even known existed. But the letter wasn't a demolition notice. It was an invitation to regularise. A retrospective planning application, sometimes called a regularisation application, allows you to apply for permission after the fact. It is assessed on the same policy grounds as any standard application. If the development would have been approved had it been applied for in advance, it can be approved retrospectively. I spent that evening finding out whether mine would have been. My extension was a single-storey rear extension on a semi-detached property in a residential area with no special designations, not in a conservation area, not adjacent to a listed building, not in a heritage zone. The extension was within the height limits and setbacks that applied to my property type. The only reason it hadn't been permitted development was the 40-centimetre depth overage. I read the relevant local plan policies. I looked at comparable applications that had been approved nearby. My extension, I concluded, would very likely have been approved had I applied in advance. I wrote to both immediate neighbours before submitting anything. I explained what had happened, apologised for not having applied in advance, and asked whether they had any concerns. I invited them to contact me before responding to the planning consultation if they did. Neither had concerns. My left neighbour said she thought the extension was a nice addition. My right neighbour said he wished he'd done the same years ago. Both wrote short supporting statements to the planning officer. The retrospective application cost £346. I submitted it myself with an elevation drawing commissioned from a local architectural technician for £200 and a supporting statement I wrote explaining why the development complied with the relevant policies. Permission was granted 6 weeks later. The planning officer's decision noted that the development complied with policies on residential amenity, character and impact on neighbouring properties. Both neighbours' supporting statements had been considered. The enforcement notice was withdrawn. Total cost, £546 and 20 hours of my time to regularise something that, had I applied in advance, would almost certainly have been approved as a matter of routine. Check before you build. Planning permissions are public, the policies are public, and a 30-minute read of the permitted development rules for your property type costs nothing. But if you've already received the enforcement letter, read it carefully. It is not always the end of the story. Has a planning or building issue ever turned out to be more manageable than it first appeared? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more complete stories with no part 2s that never come, follow the page. New story every day.